Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar today. My name is Tori Jaffa, and I'm the Marketing and Events Officer at Connecting Up, who is the Australian Global Leader of Giving Tuesday, for those who don't know. Our webinar today is on crowdfunding for Giving Tuesday and is presented by Claire from Possible. Now, we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar, so if you do have a question throughout the webinar, please feel free to type it in, but we'll just read it at the end. I'll now hand it over to Claire. All yours.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. As I'm going to talk about community crowdfunding, so crowdfunding for causes and for not-for-profits. So I'll start off with kind of an introduction to Possible, and then I'll go into what crowdfunding actually is and how it seems to work most of the time in Australia. I'll look at some case studies of partnerships that we've done with various either government or institutional organizations, and how they've used crowdfunding as a way to get communities engaged around certain issues, and also how individuals in the community have done their own kind of projects in order to raise funds or awareness around certain things. I'll also talk about why crowdfunding can actually be useful in this space, other than just raising funds. What are some of the other uses of it? And then I'll open it up for questions. So first off, a quick introduction. Possible. We started in 2010 in Sydney. At that time, there really wasn't crowdfunding in Australia. It wasn't very well known. We always tend to be about 5 years behind what's happening in the US. And so crowdfunding had been around since about 2006 in the US, and it was just picking up. But there really wasn't any option in Australia, and the ways of getting funding were incredibly traditional. So it was either you borrow money from your parents, or you go to a bank, or you go to an investor, and there wasn't kind of a platform that was connecting fans to creators, and helping them kind of be a bit more independent about how they raised money. So we started up. So far, these figures are slightly out of date. We've just launched our 10,000th project, which we're really pleased about. Most of our projects are in Australia to open up to other countries. Our success rate, which means the percentage of our projects that reach their targets, is 65%, which is incredibly high and about 2 to 3 times higher than any other platform that's in Australia at the moment, and even globally. And we've raised about $40 million for various projects so far. So what is crowdfunding? I'm assuming that most of you here would have obviously heard about crowdfunding, and that's why you've come to this webinar. But let me just kind of go through how crowdfunding works on Possible and in general. So there's 3 main things that you need to think about when it comes to crowdfunding and how it's used. The first is that you need to have a target, so an amount that you're trying to raise with your project. So in this case, the example that you see on screen was a trade magazine for the hairdressing industry, and they needed $200,000 to stay open. Otherwise, they were going to have to close down shop, basically. So their target was $200,000. Now, it can be difficult to come up with a target, especially when you're raising money around a cause, because there's kind of no limit as to how much you want to raise, right? You could raise 10,000, but of course 100,000 would be great. So we usually recommend to people thinking about setting a target based around how quickly you can get to 30% of that target. And the reason for that is projects that we see being successful, if they're running over a 4-week period, they tend to reach 30% of the target within the first week. So if you've set that you can achievably reach 30% of that in the first week, then that's kind of a comfortable target, and you can moderate it up or down based on that estimation. So you need to have a target. The next thing is time frames. So the longest you can keep a project up on Possible, on most crowdfunding platforms for that matter, is 60 days. And having said that, a lot of projects will just go for the maximum amount of time because they think, oh, the longer it's up, the more I can raise, and the safer I kind of feel because I have all this headroom to work around. But we are actually finding that the longer that you keep a project up, the longer you have to be working on it, and also the longer that the project runs, it tends to lose a sense of up on screen. They wanted to raise obviously 200,000, which is quite a hefty amount for crowdfunding, and they actually raised that in 4 days. So they raised in publishers, things like that. So, setting a longer time frame is never an indication of how much you're going to raise. It's really something that you should set how much time you have to work on this and whether you have any important events that you're working around. So for something like setting a theme around Giving Tuesday or a particular month, initiatives like Movember and things like that, that's when you see the time frame being used more strategically. So I want to run a 3-week campaign because there are such and such events coming up during this time that I need the campaign to cover. The last thing that I've got on the screen is the idea of all or nothing, and this is something that is very specific to what Possible does. There are crowdfunding platforms that allow you to kind of this means that you need to raise your target in order to get any of the money pledged. So if you don't hit your target within the duration of time frame, no money will change hands at all, which means that any money pledged will be returned to the supporters. In fact, it will not even be charged to their cards. You won't receive anything. You also will not be required to pay any fees at all in terms of platform fees and payment fees. The reason that we do this, we do get asked quite a lot to be more flexible on this. And as I mentioned, there are platforms that are flexible, but we find that sense of urgency that builds around a target is incredibly powerful. And we very, very often see projects raising 10, 20, 30, even $100,000 in just the last day alone because there is a target. And what you tend to see with platforms that don't have a target, for instance, I think Indiegogo is probably the main platform that offers flexible funding where you don't have to hit your target to get the funding, is they see a very, very low success rate. So again, Possible's success rate is 65%. Indiegogo's success rate is about 9%, so that's a huge kind of difference. The other reason is that it's just more responsible and ethical to your supporters to have a target because you know your project, what you're trying to achieve better than anybody else. And if you say that you need $50,000 and you only raise $1,000, you're not going to be able to do what you said you would do. So there's really not much reason why you should have that money. About crowdfunding, which makes it very different from soliciting donations, is that you're offering people rewards in return for the money that they're pledging to you. There are several reasons for this. First of all, when you tend to solicit donations, it creates a psychological impression that you are kind of in a position where you need to be pitied. Whereas crowdfunding is very much about kind of making people feel that this is something that they want to get on board with, that this is something very interesting that you're embarking on, and it's a journey that they should be part of. So there is a kind of exchange that happens. Having said this, we found that across the site, as many as 1 in 3 people do not choose any reward when they pledge, and this is whether they're pledging to a film project or a project that's run by a charity. So there is a very, very strong kind of feeling of giving behind that's driving crowdfunding, but we still kind of tend to see that a lot of people do like to have those rewards.
Sorry, Claire.
The other thing to note about rewards is, yes?
Sorry, I've just had a couple of people chime in and let me know that your audio keeps dropping out. I'm not sure whether you're just on Wi-Fi or you've got a connection to the internet, but it is dropping in and out, so we are missing little bits of the presentation.
Oh, okay. Was this happening when we did the test just before we started as well?
It wasn't doing it so badly then, no, but I've had about 3 people say, and I can hear it as well. And it's just, it'll slow down and then it'll speed up and it makes it incomprehensible for everyone.
Oh, okay. Give me a second.
Sure.
Okay. I might have to drop out completely and then come back in because what I'll do is I'll go and plug directly into, rather than use Wi-Fi, I'll use a direct connection.
Easy. That's fine. So everyone just stay online, and Claire, you can come in and out again. Just let me know if you've got any problems.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'll see you guys soon.
Okay. Thanks everyone for staying online. It shouldn't be too long. And thank you for those who let me know. Just while Claire's getting ready, I'm wondering if everyone can share what their plans are or what they're thinking to do for Giving Tuesday. It'd be great to hear some stories from everyone, hear anything that they're struggling with or that they would like to see from the Giving Tuesday headquarters. If you all want to let us know, that would be great, and that means we can help you more to get that Giving Tuesday campaign a success. So feel free to type anything in. Hi everyone, thanks for holding on still. We're just waiting for Claire to come back, and thank you all for sticking around. Hopefully this second part will be nice and clear. We'll let you know when we're back on. I'm not sure if you're talking, Claire, but I can't hear you. Easy, all yours.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you for holding in there. I'll just quickly reiterate the three things that make crowdfunding funding, and that is the target, the amount that you need to raise, the time frame, how long you're going to leave the project up, and the limit to that is up to 60 days. The fact that it's all or nothing, which means that you need to hit your target in order to receive any of the funds, and also the idea of rewards. So I think where I stopped was talking about how rewards can be a really powerful way to motivate people to give to a project and to also feel that they're part of it in a way that just donating doesn't. It can be a really powerful kind of connection between a person who's pledging to get something in the mail or to get, you know, a recognition online that they've pledged to this project. The other thing is that we have a partnership with GiveNow that if you are fundraising for a particular organization that has DGR status, that's a charity or not-for-profit, we can allow kind of straight out donations to be given through our system, and that means that you can also issue tax deductible receipts. And as we tend to find that 1 in 3 people across the site often pledge and say that they don't want a reward even when rewards are available, it's nice to be able to at least give them a tax deductible receipt for the contribution. And of course this works very well when you're raising for a particular cause or for a not-for-profit. Okay, there are 3 general types of rewards that you see in crowdfunding. So it doesn't always have to be that you've got to go and manufacture a ton of t-shirts or, you know, come up with something really special. Often people who are crowdfunding use stuff that they already have access to as part of their project. So something that's not going to cost them a lot of money to make, because of course then you have to factor that into the cost of the entire project. So the 3 different things that we see, the first one that you see, take a seat, that's what we call a recognition reward. The most common for this is sending somebody a thank you card or putting kind of a thank you on Twitter or social media. But you can, it's basically any kind of way where that person is recognized by name for their contribution. So this particular project was raising funds to rebuild the town's pub, which had burnt down. I'll talk a bit more about that project later. And one of their rewards, which was on a higher level, was that you could actually name one of the stools in the bar after yourself, as long as you don't mind being sat on. So that's a recognition reward, and these are incredibly powerful. We've had projects before. For instance, we had one called the Great Forest National Park, and that was trying to extend the State Forest of Victoria. And one of their rewards was that you could have your name or the name of someone that you choose, so for instance your daughter or your grandchild, put onto a plaque that would go into the forest. So that was a really powerful reward, and a lot of people chose that. It really drove the campaign. The other kind of reward is a tangible reward, and that's the one that you see in the middle. That's when you're actually giving somebody something they can hold in their hand. And this is very useful if you are crowdfunding for a product which already has something that you can quite easily give away. This is also where things like t-shirts or bumper stickers would come in. But be really creative with it, and also remember that whatever you give as a reward, it doesn't have to be completely linked to your project. So for instance, if you are doing this particular project was an art space, a community art space that was raising funds to renovate after many, many years of kind of making do with the space that they had. And one of their rewards was that they gave away cuttings of this very kind of iconic tree that grew outside their space. So it wasn't to do with the arts, you know, but it was something that was emblematic of the space that they had lived in for many years. We've also had campaigns that call in favors from friends or from sponsors. We had a campaign that was raising funds to create kind of a support fund for musicians who were in between jobs, you know, or who needed some extra help. And they had a sponsor who gave them a car. It was a car dealership, and they actually gave them a car that they could give away. So obviously a car doesn't have very much to do with music, but nevertheless it was still something that helped them to raise a lot of money for the campaign. So be creative at thinking about the kind of resources that you have and that could be linked to your project in interesting ways. The last category is experiences, which could be workshops, it could be just holding a party at the end of the day, it could be a launch, something that somebody would not be able to buy, but that they would have access to through your campaign. So kind of, yeah, workshops or parties do very well for this. We've also had ones that were raising funds for particular issues in the environment and that were driven by scientists, and the scientists would say, I'd come and do a lecture at your school or at your workplace. So those are all kinds of examples of experience-based rewards. All right, so I'm going to go into why crowdfund. The traditional reason that when crowdfunding started, it was immediately very appealing to the arts and to startups. And they were very well suited to it because they had products that they could immediately sell. And that kind of has been very much the traditional idea of crowdfunding, a way for you to raise funds, yes, but also to test an idea. Because in the traditional sense, when you want to create a project and you need funding for it, you often have to borrow the funds from a bank or from an investor or from a government grant where there are kind of certain stipulations as to how these funds can be used. So crowdfunding gives you a lot more space to take risks. You may have an idea that you're not actually sure will be appealing or whether it actually has a market or that people are even interested in doing this. But through running a campaign, even if your campaign fails, the only thing you would have risked is the time that you put into the campaign. You wouldn't have a loan that you now need to pay back for an idea that's failed. So that's kind of the traditional sense of crowdfunding. But when we move into looking at crowdfunding for communities or crowdfunding for particular causes, what we're finding is people are very much using crowdfunding for the crowd more so than for the funding. And this is incredibly useful to kind of issues or causes where there's not a great deal of awareness and the organization needs to create a kind of buy-in from the community. You have to create some kind of interest in the community in order to take the project anywhere. So this is another, the screenshots that you're seeing right now are also from the Great Forest National Park project. And this is an interesting example because I think they raised $70,000, but they pretty much spent almost all of that money running the marketing for the campaign because their final goal was not, $70,000 is not going to get very far when you think about actually being able to create this forest or this forest reserve. But it will go very far when you're thinking about just getting the buy-in from the community to start putting pressure on the government, to start getting corporate sponsorship, all this kind of thing, to build a movement behind what they were trying to do, which was to extend this national forest. So this is where crowdfunding can be very useful. So in the traditional sense, you go to kind of networking events, you try to spread awareness through the media, in the newspapers, all this kind of thing for an issue that you care about. The thing is, it's very easy for somebody to say, oh, that's a great idea, and leave it at that. Right, because it doesn't cost them anything. But when you're running a crowdfunding campaign, there's this rallying point for people to not just say, oh, that's a great idea, but, oh, I can actually do something about this. I can actually be part of this. And that's very much what crowdfunding gives the opportunity for causes to do. So there's this idea of building an audience, of raising awareness, and you have to also remember that these people who have pledged to your campaign will now follow you. Whatever new project you're embarking on, you have this mailing list of people that cared enough about it in the beginning stages to actually pledge money to it, and they're going to be able to continue to grow as a community and support what you're doing. This is some statistics that we found on what people actually share on social media and why they share. And this very strongly supports this kind of idea of why crowdfunding and why community awareness is very important when you're raising funds and awareness for an issue. And that's because if you look on the right-hand side, why people share content. Overwhelmingly, people share things because it's a way to support causes or issues they care about. So if you're creating a crowdfunding campaign for an issue, whether it's for a charity, whether it's for an environmental cause, you're creating an excuse for people to share this because it shows that they believe in what you're doing. And of course, that helps you to create marketing for the campaign. That helps you to kind of extend the reach that you've got because people will be sharing this quite readily on social media. If we go back to the Great Forest National Campaign, all of these images that you're seeing were things that they created, and they pretty much ran their campaign purely on Facebook. And if you look at the number of shares that they got for some of these images, it's pretty incredible that they were being shared hundreds of times, and that's where the real value comes from. Again, it's very easy for somebody to like something, but to share it means that you're actually extending the reach of that campaign. When we looked at the analytics of how many people had seen these posts, it was in the millions, and that's because of the number of shares. Another thing that we find very interesting and that supports this again is we did a survey recently of all the data across our site because we've just hit 5 years. And we found that overwhelmingly people, when we asked people why they were pledging, it wasn't, oh, to get the latest gadget or, oh, because I wanted to see this movie. It was because they loved the idea of that concept of patronage, to be supporting people in their stories and helping these things get off the ground. This is something that usually is not accessible to most people. It used to be that if you wanted to sponsor something, you'd have to give, in the thousands, but now everybody can give $20 towards a project. And it's different again from just donating to charity, where you give this $20 and then often you don't actually know where this $20 is gone. But with a crowdfunding campaign, it's very, very concrete. They'll tell you this is exactly what we're using the money for, and because it's project-based, people can follow kind of the trajectory of the project and see when it's finished and what they actually created out of it. We've also found that campaigns that have DGR status or are linked to organizations with DGR status, so it's some kind of cause-based campaign, raise almost twice the amount of campaigns without that. So it's a very powerful motivating factor, and it shows that people want to be part of these things and want to feel like they're making a change. Another reason why we're seeing crowdfunding being picked up, and this comes very close to why we're actually seeing a trend in government and corporates, and also kind of community institutions using crowdfunding. So traditionally, when an organization decides, right, I care about this particular issue, I want to show my community, my customers that I care about this, I'll just give a bunch of money. I'll give $50,000, or I'll give $100,000, or I'll set up a foundation for it. So this tends to be very one-off in nature. So you give the money, there's a lot of kind of press, there's a lot of interest, and then it dies down, and you have to kind of give another chunk of money in order to see any result again. But with crowdfunding, the usefulness of it is that you're not just giving money, you're requiring the person who's receiving the money, that organization or that charity, to do some groundwork as well to prove that their idea has legs, that people actually want this idea. And it goes back to the community building. So if you're running a crowdfunding campaign and you're often, so these corporates, for instance, the Vodafone Foundation, they match funded a collection of projects that were creating mobile apps, but for a good cause. So what's happening is they're not just saying, okay, I'll give you $20,000, build me this app. They're saying, I will match fund you, which means you have to raise the first $10,000 from your community, which means you actually have to prove that people want this, that people are going to use this app, that it's going to be a useful idea. So you're not seeing this money get lost. You're seeing this money going towards an idea that already has gotten a lot of support from a community, and this community can continue to grow and create a sustainable cause out of this idea. So I think recently we've seen with the new budget that funding has been cut across pretty much everywhere. We've actually had government organizations come to us and say, well, the funding that we've got to give to community groups has been cut, and we've only got a third to give this year. So how do we stretch this money and make sure also that the money is going to causes that are kind of going to be able to do the most with it? And they're seeing crowdfunding as a really useful way of doing this, of ensuring that their money is going somewhere where it's really needed and where there's a lot of interest in the community, and that community is then going to invest to take the idea further than just giving that money, seeing that money spent, and then that's the end of it. Okay, I'm now going to go into, very, very briefly, what we usually see makes a crowdfunding campaign successful, so you have an idea of what it takes to run something that's going to hit its target. The first thing is very much a good story, something that captures people's imagination. This is again in line with that whole idea that you want to tell people that I'm going to go on this amazing journey and I want you to be part of it. You want to get that buy-in from the community. So I'm going to go back to this project that I mentioned earlier, which this pub in the town of Buchan. I'm not sure if any of you have been to Buchan in Victoria. It's got about 400 people in it, so it's not a huge town. And they came to us and said, look, the only pub that we had, the only restaurant in this whole town, burnt down, and we want to rebuild it. We want to raise $600,000 to do it. And honestly, we were a bit skeptical because a town of 400 people, that's probably smaller than the number of friends that you have on Facebook, and they want to raise $600,000 to rebuild a pub. So how do they make people care about this when most of the people who are pledging to this project will probably be from outside of Buchan itself? And they did a really good job of this. They went really, really personal. They didn't try to kind of, put on a brave front or anything. They were just very honest about what had happened and how the burning down of the pub had affected that community, that was the only reason that people had stopped when they were driving past the town, was because there was somewhere to eat. And also, it had also become the heart of the community. It was where weddings took place, birthdays, celebrations, because it pretty much was the only venue of that kind anywhere nearby. And this really got them very, very far. And it's what we say to brands that come to us and want to run crowdfunding campaigns. For instance, someone like Vodafone or Hertz Car Rentals, who have also been involved with us. Brands tend to very much want to hide behind their brand or push their branding story very strongly. And this isn't always an asset, because people will perceive you as, if you're a big brand, why do I need to give you my money? Why do you need it? So instead, you have to go back to a personal level and tell your story as an individual or as a community. Why is this very important to us? And for this particular example, as you can see I put some of the comments up that we saw on the project. There were people pledging from, way outside Victoria, outside even of Australia, and it was just the story. These people are likely never going to actually visit this town, but they believed in the story enough to actually put money down to help these people. We also see the value of good graphics and visuals and a good video. Again, it helps to tell a story when people can see you. The thing about crowdfunding is that often your project is happening on the internet and there isn't a lot of a personal connection, and a video can really bring this across. We recommend that the video be less than 2 minutes. In fact, if you can squeeze it into 30 seconds, that's great, because people spend about 1.5 minutes on a crowdfunding page, and that includes the time it takes to put in their credit card details and choose a reward and all that kind of stuff. So the videos that we've seen being the most successful have always been ones that have just gotten their point across very, very clearly in a short amount of time. And a promotional strategy, which is something that's very often overlooked, I think, because often, and you may have experienced this, the first time that you heard about crowdfunding would probably have been because there was a big story on the news about someone who put up a project and all this money poured in, and it makes it seem really, really easy. Well, in fact, there's a lot of hard work that goes on behind the scenes, because running a crowdfunding campaign is like marketing. It's like running a marketing campaign, and you really have to have all your plans in place. This is something that we show to most campaigners who are coming through Possible, and it's kind of an indication of the activity that you see when a crowdfunding campaign is running. So this will happen for almost every single campaign. When it first launches, you see a lot of pledges, a lot of activity, because you launched, you've sent it out, you've gotten media attention, and so on. And then it tends to kind of dip, and it goes quiet for a while. This is also why we don't recommend running a very long campaign, because often what you're prolonging is just that middle bit where people are going in and saying, oh, what a great project, but they've still got 6 weeks, I'll come back and pledge later, and then they just forget. So you don't see a lot happening because there's not a lot of urgency around it. So this is useful to think about when it comes to planning your promotional strategy and thinking, right, if I'm going to run this campaign for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, what can I line up in the middle to keep people interested and keep them engaged, and also to reach different target audiences. So I'm kind of creating a trend throughout my campaign of interest. And also to make sure that those people who have come to your campaign in the beginning and said, okay, I'll come back later, actually do come back and don't just completely forget about the whole thing. The other thing about the U-curve is that, of course, towards the end, you see another spike in activity, and this is because there's the target again. There's that all or nothing that people realize that, okay, guys, if we don't hit our target, we're not going to get anything, and that's where the urgency comes in. For the pub project, so again, they wanted to raise $600,000. They raised $300,000 of that in the last week, and they were raising almost $100,000 a day in the last couple of days. You also want to build an early momentum. So I mentioned earlier that you always want to try to hit 30% of your target in the first week, and you should very much plan your promotional strategy around that. And it just gives you a lot of time in order to to make sure that you're on track, that you're going to hit your target at the end of the day. Another thing that we recommend is, in a traditional marketing, and even when we've been involved with PR campaigns and things like that, we tend to see that PR companies will kind of plan everything very much around a launch. So they'll have media attention, all this kind of thing happening on day one. And this is what the Pub Project did as well. They actually got the Herald Sun to put them on the front page on the day that they launched. But the thing about crowdfunding is, because you've got that target and people are judging the success of your campaign based on how soon you hit that target. For the Pub Project, we saw them get a lot of traffic on the first day from that Herald Sun article, but no conversions. That means nobody was actually pledging because they were looking at the target and again thinking, oh, they're so far away from their target. I'm not going to waste my time and put a pledge in for a project that's not going to succeed. So we actually recommend ordering the people that you reach out to, your outreach, and the plan of your outreach according to people who are most likely to pledge to the ones that are least likely to pledge. So if you're a company running a campaign, you would probably start by letting everybody in the company know that it's coming and asking them to go in and pledge on day one. And then once you've got a couple $1,000s in and you've kind of, you've made some headway on your target, then you go to the next group of people and the next and the next, and then you plan your media outreach once you've kind of already passed that 30 to 50% mark, to make sure that people are coming in and they're pledging and they're not just going away because they don't think you're going to be successful. All right, how do you get involved as part of Giving Tuesday and just as an organization that wants to use crowdfunding as a way to raise awareness for a particular cause? We have a lot of partners and they've all kind of used crowdfunding in different ways to suit them. So I'm going to give you some examples of what can work. So this is a partnership that we had with Grilled. You may have tried their burgers. They are very, very good. Grilled has their own initiative called Local Matters, where they support a local social enterprise or a local kind of charity every month through allowing their customers to vote in store for which one that they would like Grilled to give money to. So for the Grilled collection, we actually had 3 possible projects that were all social enterprise or for a particular charity. We had one that was to help people in need through the selling of artwork. So they'd sell artwork and a percentage of that would go to needy communities. We also had one that was Homey, which is they actually create a shop that sells fashion by local designers, all based in Melbourne, and the proceeds of that go to help the homeless. And a youth food movement, which is really to educate people about the importance of eating right and eating sustainable. So kind of these great projects that were happening on Possible, and what Grilled did is they gave them support by kind of choosing these projects, by promoting the campaigns in their store, and then by match funding, by I think it was giving them just a small amount at the end. I think it was 500 for each project and 1,000 for the one that raised the most. So kind of really small steps, but a great way to support people who are already starting things in their community. So rather than Grilled going away and creating their whole new charity, they look for what people are already doing in the community that's worthwhile, and they think about ways that they can support that. And they used crowdfunding kind of very effectively in that manner. This is another example, and this is more of an individual campaign. So Support Act is an organization that supports musicians who are on the lower spectrum, so they're just starting out or they're needy in some way because they haven't quite hit the point in their career where they've become self-sufficient. So Support Act ran a big campaign that was trying to raise a lot more money. So if you look back on the Grilled collection, each of these projects were kind of raising between $5,000 to $10,000. So when you see a collection of many projects, you tend to see each of the projects raising smaller amounts. So another way to do it is to just run one big project and put all of your effort and your network, your community into that kind of one project. And this is another example. So again, a collection space. So what Moo did is rather than run kind of a really focused initiative, which is what Grilled did. So Grilled ran for a month, and they kind of handpicked the projects that they wanted, and they gave just those 3 projects a lot of support during that month. Moo did an ongoing collection where they had a focus. So their focus was design and local creatives, and they just chose a project every month to give $500 to. So again, it's rather than having to create your own project or your own cause, and you as an organization having to put a lot of resources behind pushing that out. You can ride on what people are already doing in the community. So finding people who are working around the focus that you have. For instance, with what Vodafone did, where they said, okay, we're a mobile company, so we want to find people who are creating mobile apps, but creating them for the community or creating them for social good. So you're riding on what other people are doing, and you're making sure that they have more support and they're more likely to be successful. And again, because of the usefulness of crowdfunding, you're raising a lot more awareness than what you would do if you just gave a grant to, a charity that you choose. Because each of these projects are then going out and getting their own networks and raising money from people, and they will be telling that network that, hey, this organization has gotten behind us. So you're extending the reach of what you're doing and the impact. I'm just going to bring up some things, kind of these more of a technical detail of what Possible offers, what you can do with the Possible system. So a Possible project basically looks like this. You put up a project, you'll have the story of the project, you'll have rewards that people can choose. But some other options that you can have is, for instance, you can set up a private campaign. This is useful if you're planning to launch a campaign as an organization, but for instance, you only want to push it out to your employees within the organization or your stakeholders before you release it to the public. You can launch it privately first, and then you can switch it to public later. And a lot of campaigns do this in order to build that early momentum and make sure that they've got some headway on their target before they launch publicly. You can also have a self-hosted campaign. So if you're an organization that has kind of a very big web presence and you don't necessarily want to divert people outside of your website, Possible creates a self-hosted option which allows you to host the campaign directly on your own website, and all you need to have is kind of your own developers who are able to embed this on your website. But that allows you to keep it all in-house, and you can kind of set up your own collection similar to this. But doing it all, of course, on your own website. And the other thing about Possible, and the reason why I think we have really, really high success rate that we do, is that we work very, very closely with all of our project creators, whether they're coming from a partner organization or whether they're just an individual who's trying to make a change in a small way. We're quite happy to speak to people who have specific questions about crowdfunding, or even if you have an idea for an initiative and you're interested to see whether Possible would partner with you, please do come and speak to us. Okay, thank you very much. Once again, thanks for kind of bearing with us during the technical issues we had earlier, and I'm happy to open up for questions now.
Thanks, Claire. So besides Indigo and Possible, are there any other crowdfunding platforms in Australia?
Yeah. Sorry, did you ask if there are other crowdfunding platforms?
Yes.
Yeah, there are quite a few. There are also ones that are really specific. For instance, you could probably find a crowdfunding platform that was just for farmers. But the thing is with crowdfunding is you really want the crowd. So we don't recommend actually going for one that's incredibly specific, because you're actually limiting your reach to a much smaller community. But there are quite a few different ones out there, and they all have a slightly different focus. So it's worth doing your research.
Awesome. Doreen asks, well, she's got a little story here. We're a not-for-profit that has been working to get an indoor heated public pool for Ravenshoe and community. This includes 660 plus kids who have no safe place to learn to swim. Initially, we need $35,000 for our final architectural plans and ultimately $3.6 million to complete the project. I would like to inquire as to whether our project is suitable for raising funds through crowdfunding, as the only rewards we can offer would be free swimming lessons and aqua aerobic sessions when the pool is built.
Well, again, I'd kind of come back to the pub example. So again, when the pub came to us and said, we want to raise $600,000 for this tiny town, which only has 400 people, we did think, well, your reach is going to be a bit limited, and we'll give it a go. We'll help you as much as we can, but honestly, we can't promise that people, this will catch on outside of Buchan. But I think if you have a very strong story, often community stories are very powerful. It's definitely kind of a plus. And the good thing about your project, Doreen, is that you've already broken up the amounts that you would need. So you're not immediately asking people to give you $3 million. You've got kind of a smaller target to work for, and that can be really helpful because you can run a campaign on a smaller target. So say you're trying to raise 30,000 just to complete the plans, and then you'll build the audience through that campaign, and you yourself will also get to test whether crowdfunding is even appropriate for you. And then if you're successful, then you know, okay, great, this works for us. We can then take it to the next level, and you would already have all these stakeholders on board who have already pledged to your project. In terms of the rewards, again with the pub, we found that a lot of the rewards, people were saying either I don't want a reward, or they were choosing a reward that they would never get because they're probably not going to fly from the UK just to come and visit this small town in Victoria. So it's not really important. But I would suggest adding some extra things, like maybe a thank you card, something that you could send to someone who was outside of your particular area.
Awesome. Well, we don't have any more questions. I'll just give everyone a minute or so, just in case they do have any last-minute questions
Sure.
that have come up. But thank you very much, Claire, for presenting again on Giving Tuesday, and thank you everyone for tuning in as well. No more questions have come through, so yeah, again, thank you for everyone for participating. As always, we'll send out a recording of the webinar. This one will be in 2 parts, so just be wary of that. And obviously, if you've got any questions for Claire, feel free to email me through and I can forward them to Claire if you've got any crowdfunding questions. We do have a couple more questions actually that have just come through. Do you mind sticking around, Claire?
Yeah, no worries.
Diane says, we have a wellbeing community group needing funding to continue its great work. Any recommendations here? We do craft activity, natural therapist, visiting language teachers, engaging our attendees, morning teas, but maybe we could work on some type of tangible rewards to inspire pledges.
Yep, so I guess the most important thing would really be to think of what you're trying to raise funds for and think of a compelling story around that. Often the things that you're trying to raise funds for can be incredibly, unsexy, as I like to say. So it could be something like, we're just trying to meet the next rent check or something like that, which is completely fine. But think of a way to angle the story so it's really powerful to people. So it's not just help us raise our rent. It's, help us to continue the great work that we're doing in this community through all of these things. In terms of rewards, it sounds like you're in really good shape because you have a lot of things that you can offer people. Yeah, I would, again, similar to what I told to Doreen, I would recommend having some things that would appeal to someone who's outside of that space or somebody who doesn't necessarily want an experience. Things that you can do are you could give vouchers to people so that you allow people to actually buy an experience for somebody else. You could we've had recipes, even though it's not super related, but if you have particular recipes from your community that would be interesting to people, that's something that you could give. You could also do social media recognition, handbooks, or online workshops, all those kinds of things. Just think about what you have access to as part of your community and what you could bundle to people to send them just as a thank you for their support.
And just going back to Doreen, she's actually asking how can we start, which is a really good question.
So you can start creating a project at any time, and you don't have to launch it. You can leave it up on the site as long as you want and kind of continue to work on it. You just have to go to possible.com/create. Or you can, if you can't find it, just drop me an email and I'll send you the link to that. And then once you get started, you can send us your draft that you're working on and ask us, we can help you with any questions you have from there.
And finally, last question from Deb. We're a specialist homelessness service who would like to expand our reach and capacity by becoming a neighbourhood centre. We actually need a location and building. Would it be possible with Possible?
Yes, so I assume that means that you're trying to crowdfund to find a new home or to put down a deposit or whatever it is. That's something that's done quite commonly on Possible, actually. If you send me an email, I can send you some examples of projects that have done that. Either they have an existing center and they're trying to move to a new home, or they don't have a center at all. Maybe they've only had an online presence, or they've kind of had a nomadic presence, and they're trying to really create kind of a solid place in the community. So we have had quite a lot of projects, and that's a great story. That's something that people buy into quite often.
Awesome. Well, that is all the questions for now. And now that we're pretty much at the end of the webinar, thank you everyone for participating. As you all know, you'll get a recording of the webinar, so just keep posted on the Giving Tuesday website and on the Connecting Up website for any more Giving Tuesday webinars. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much, everyone.